Please hang up and try again.
Of all the passion and resurrection narratives, only the Gospel of John has a traceable history. Revelation version 1, Philo of Alexandria, and by extension, Plato, Platonism, and Gnosticism, all are relatives of the Logos concept in the Gospel of John. Extracting information from Revelation version 1, there are two primary concepts that are easily detectable in the Johannine theology. First, the pattern of the Logos, its trial during the era of Tiberius, which is also the era of Pilate, its death, and its resurrection are all aspects of the Gospel of John. Hades, the complaining souls, the darkness, and the shaking or commotion are all part of the Gospel of Nicodemus. These two books make up a complete story of the Logos as portrayed by Revelation, and the two books are complementary and intended to be in the same canon. The key to understanding the role of these two texts is to compare the text to the Synoptics and the Gospel of Peter. In all of these texts, at the crucifixion of Jesus, a darkness and a shaking are described. On the surface, these texts seem to be a relatively appropriate understanding of Revelation version 1. However, John's version of Jesus is the Logos, and according to John, the Logos, which is the form of intellect or word, emanates the form of light. The Logos and the light cannot be defeated by darkness. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The author of the Gospel of John is well aware of the darkness in Revelation version 1. However, since the pattern states that the Logos went to Hades, it is only logical that the darkness and shaking would occur in Hades, and that the darkness would be defeated by the Logos. This is where the Gospel of Nicodemus comes in. The Gospel of Nicodemus states, "When hell and death and their wicked ministers saw that, they were stricken with fear, they and their cruel officers, at the sight of the brightness of so great light in their own realm, seeing Christ of a sudden in their abode, and they cried out, saying, 'We are overcome by thee.'" And again, in the Gospel of John, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The statement by the Gospel of John is a direct reference to the darkness in the Gospel of Nicodemus. It is almost certain that the original author of John also wrote the original Gospel of Nicodemus. The personification of hell and death in Nicodemus is a very literal interpretation of Revelation 6. "I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades followed close behind him." The original Gospel of John and the Gospel of Nicodemus are the only satisfactory answers to Revelation version 1. The second primary aspect drawn into the Johannine theology from Revelation is the idea of two witnesses. "And I will appoint my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days, clothed in sackcloth. They are the two olive trees and the two lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth." Only the Gospel of John describes John the Baptist as a witness. "There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe." And later in the book, Jesus states, "In your own law it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me." The Gospel of John fully satisfies the Jewish requirement of two witnesses. No other passion and resurrection gospel so clearly states the two witnesses concept. The Gospel of Nicodemus also carries on the idea of two witnesses. "And they shut the doors and took the law of the Lord and put it into their hands and adjured them by the God Adonai and the God of Israel, which spake unto our fathers by the prophets, saying, Believe you that it is Jesus who raised you from the dead? Tell us how you have arisen from the dead." And when Quirinus and Lucius heard this adjuration, they trembled in their body and groaned, being troubled in heart. These two resurrected people, Quirinus and Lucius, were the witnesses to the events surrounding the descent of the Logos into hell. The Gospel of Nicodemus is the reason that every single passion narrative has Jesus crucified in between two people. Those two people fulfill the requirement of two witnesses in the Gospel of Nicodemus. What seems like an arbitrary story in the rest of the Gospels, these two people crucified on each side of Jesus were critical to the Johannine theology. The Gospel of John fills an extraordinarily unique role in Christianity. It is the only text that emphasizes Jesus as the Logos and light, and it is the only gospel that requires the Gospel of Nicodemus in order to be complete. Without Nicodemus, the Gospel of John is a failed text that leaves a massive hole in the pattern of events described in Revelation. As we will see later, the other Gospels take a different approach to filling that hole. The Gospel of Nicodemus will no longer be necessary, but every single one of the Passion and Resurrection Gospels will maintain that there were two criminals on each side of Jesus during the crucifixion. In regards to practices and theology, the terminology used in Revelation, John, and Nicodemus are consistent with a Jewish first theology. In order to become a Christian at that point, a proselyte would be required to follow Judaism. The only practices that would have been eliminated would have been traditions surrounding the recently destroyed Temple of Jerusalem. Other than being a Gnostic, Messianic, Jewish cult, there isn't much difference between the theologies, and this type of theology probably wasn't uncommon. In practice, the Johannine theology would have been at home in any synagogue. However, Judaism was largely dispersed from Judea thanks to the Jewish-Roman War, and due to the fact that the theology was a Logos and Light cult, the practice of meeting every day before sunrise became widespread. Pliny the Younger would take note of this a few decades later. On authenticity, the Gospel of John is probably the most manipulated book outside of Revelation. Approximately 50% is near original condition, though this number is based solely on absolute requirements of the theology. Depending on multiple variables, the text could be as much as near 90% original. Authenticity of the Gospel of Nicodemus is unknown, since the text was originally intended to be the testimony of Lucius and Quirinius. Perhaps as much as 90% could be near original condition. One final note on the Gospel of Nicodemus. It is my preference to separate the descent into hell from the letter of Pilate. The letter of Pilate will be referred to as Acts of Pilate, and only the descent into hell will be referred to as Gospel of Nicodemus. Though the two are related, they are not intended to be combined into one text, and the Acts of Pilate was likely written several years later. The likely date range for the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Nicodemus is around 70 to 75 CE.